Welcome to the ADR Across the Globe podcast. This is another episode in which we interview leading figures in the world of alternative dispute resolution. And today's episode, we're delighted, Chinwe and I are delighted to have on the show Masood Ahmed and David Sixsmith, both professors of the universities of Leicester and of Northumberland, respectively. And delighted to have you here, gentlemen. They're both editors of a new work on modern mediation, looking at different aspects, interestingly, not only focused on England and Wales, but also looking at Holland and further abroad as well. So without further ado, I just wonder, Masood and David, if you'd like to explain a little about what brought you together and what brought you to the idea of the book, that would be great.
David, do you want to kick off, or?
Yeah, sure. So this project really began quite a number of years ago now. I mean, these books themselves take a while to come together, but Masood and I were presenting at the same conference and had a discussion about the fact that there was, even though that there had been significant developments in certain jurisdictions, that there wasn't really a platform which brought all of that together. So we initially talked about the idea of potentially running a seminar which we were going to invite international participants to take part in. Once we'd kind of established that actually the funding was a bit more difficult to come by than we were expecting, we then moved on to the second stage of what we'd initially discussed, which was really this book. We wanted to kind of use the papers from the seminar that we'd initially planned to kind of put together in the form of an edited collection, and that's what finally we've reached now. So I think we started this process in something like 2022, maybe.
I think it was. Yeah.
I think so.
So it's been a while.
And then obviously it was a question of recruiting the relevant participants. We wanted it to have not just a focus on a single jurisdiction. Obviously, a lot of the work that Masood and I have done in the past has focused very heavily on England and Wales, with some involvement in European jurisdictions as well. But we really wanted to sort of spread this a bit more widely, so across, to receive some commentary from America, and also, as we've got in the book, thankfully a contribution from China as well, outside of other jurisdictions, other European jurisdictions, and then a chapter which focuses on Nigeria as well. So we really wanted this to be a unifying text which kind of explained how mediation has developed over the course of time. And really, how its significance has increased over the course of probably the last 20 years. Masood, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I think you've covered that really well. I think, David, and the idea was also to try to get different perspectives on different civil justice reform agendas, and trying to get an insight on what policymakers, judges were doing in other jurisdictions. And as David said, we wanted, to reflect what was happening on different continents. I mean, we had a really interesting chapter in North America. We had a chapter in Brazil where new reforms have been taking place and being implemented there around ADR. And then, as David said, China, and then we have the excellent chapter by Chinwe on Nigeria, because we know that there's an Arbitration and Mediation Act there, so that's significant. So we wanted that to be reflected, as well as obviously the European jurisdictions. And there's obviously that excellent chapter by David and Amy Sixsmith on the comparative analysis between what was happening here in the small claims track and mediation being implemented there, and comparing it to what's been happening already in British Columbia, and trying to draw out best practices and sort of the challenges and opportunities of integrating mediation within the wider civil justice system, as well as chapters on the Singapore Mediation Convention, so looking at it on the international level, as well as looking at mediation resolving international disputes such as disputes around art and cultural heritage, because obviously we can draw important lessons from those practices and sort of filter them down into the domestic level as well. So, essentially, I think we did a good job of bringing those sort of scholars together and reflecting that. And one last point, obviously, is the digitization part as well, Tony, because your excellent chapter, Your and Victoria's, touches on that quite nicely and sort of reflects the modern, sort of the reform agenda around that.
Yeah. And incredibly timely as well, because the reform movement, certainly England, Wales is a topic. And this morning I was reminded that Cyprus has legislation passing, as we all know, passing through its parliament to make pre-court mediation mandatory, and for various registers of mediators to be consolidated, and for the mediators working in that regime only to be drawn from that registry, which is very interesting development, taking into account the consultation which the Civil Mediation Council's got going on, as you know, at the moment on their code for regulating their members. So we have a very different approach here to that in that. Chinwe, do you want to take it on?
So thank you so very much for that clarification, Mr. Tony. So I wanted to ask the both of you, did anything surprise you the major or significant development in mediation policy across the globe, across different countries that submitted their book chapter to both of you? Thank you.
I'll start off on that one. I think it was really interesting to see the different approaches that policymakers were taking in all those different jurisdictions which are covered in the book, and sort of the underlying sort of cultural aspect of it was also important, because when you look at, for example, the chapter on judicial mediation in China, historically for thousands of years, there's been a cultural embedded understanding that the way to resolve disputes is out of the courts and out of formal adjudication. So there's already an embedded sort of cultural approach, which is now reflected in the law and the procedure in China. And Peter Chan's chapter on that was excellent in sort of explaining that, but also taking it a step further and saying, look, how can we improve what we already have with judicial mediation there? So that was interesting to look at. Then we look at England and Wales. So again, David and Amy Sixsmith's chapter, my own chapter on the use of pre-action protocols, and some of the work that I've been doing with the Civil Justice Council, and how we're trying to enhance sort of pre-court mediation and ADR there, and how sort of it's taken a longer time to do that, because inherently we have an adversarial culture here, which is beginning to change thanks to people like Sir Geoffrey Voss, the Master of the Rolls, who's been very active in trying to bring a culture change there. And then comparing that to, for example, Brazil and Nigeria, which have taken very different approaches in terms of enhancing ADR there, and Brazil in particular, where it's been quite adversarial there, but they have this new law on implementing and enhancing ADR, but it's taking a slower approach to sort of to take that further, and that's possibly because of the different culture in terms of the judiciary and how they approach ADR. So that was a fascinating aspect of the book, just getting an insight into the historical background, where we are now, and understanding where reforms and procedures are going to go forward when it comes to mediation, both pre-action and during the court process.
And I think certainly for me, because aside from anything else, as really I think all of us wanted to going into the project. I've learned a huge amount actually, not just about the about the state of play in different jurisdictions where perhaps I might have been able to acquire information before, but I think that some of the perspectives that's been taken on how mediation has been effectively or not effectively embedded into particular civil justice systems and practices, I think was really interesting. And Masood's absolutely right. I think mandatory mediation is something which has been discussed and is now steadily, I think, being implemented across a wider range of jurisdictions. And it's interesting to see how that's been approached over and how long perhaps it's taken to get to a point where people feel like they're able to accept mandatory mediation, because of course that's part of it, isn't it? That's, it's not just about necessarily policymakers or even academics suggesting that this might be a solution. It's about ensuring the relevant stakeholders are in a position to think, actually I can see the benefit of this. I understand that it's not infringing on any particular rights that I have. It's not prohibiting my access to the court. It's just simply a mechanism through which I might well achieve a more cost-effective settlement. And I think that was the really interesting thing about the book, this idea of how how relevant stakeholders, lawyers and participants have been able to accept over the course of time, and particularly sort of Fatma's contribution, her chapter on the Turkish mandatory mediation experience, where it was really almost put on steroids. It was introduced very quickly, and actually, even though I think we all agree to a point that mandatory mediation certainly has benefits when it comes to potentially reducing the court backlog and delays and costs associated with that. But actually, her perspective of it moving too quickly can sometimes backfire, I think, is really valuable. And in my chapter, I talk about British Columbia, and they've been kind of edging towards it over sort of a 30-year period. And it's quite interesting how that consistency has really ensured that they are now in a position where it's just accepted as part of the fabric of the civil justice system. And so that was particularly interesting from my perspective.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the intriguing thing, as you say, it's the international perspectives that do lend. Distance does bring perspective and a better understanding. And there's no danger, I suppose, of anything happening in England and Wales on steroids, or some might say otherwise. Frankly, so no need to worry on that score. But the difference, and you're right to point it out, David, with British Columbia, is you have one platform in which it's adjudication there, isn't it? The second tier, but it is a whole thing. You do the triage, you go through that, you try and sort it out. That doesn't work. Then the next thing is this. It's not like you've got something outside you've got to go and do.
It's not mediation or the alternative part of the dispute resolution process is not alternative. It's just part of it. It's not just being added on somewhere down the line. I think that's really important.
Yeah, sorry, can I just ask you a question to the both of you? People always asking me, so England doesn't have multi-door courthouse, so can you both answer that? Because I'm Mr. Tony as well, because Mr. Tony is an authority in England and Wales. So.
Tony, do you want to? No, you carry on.
Well, I was just going to say, we don't have a multi-door courthouse at the moment. We just have the binary system, because all we've got is the automatic referral to mediation, the ARM scheme, which is post-issue. We have the Mether-Tidville approach, which hasn't really sparked a deluge, I suggest, of new work for mediators. And it won't. My own view is that it won't change until we get quasi-mandatory pre-court mediation obligation. And you can see how successful that is in Nigeria. They got multi-door courthouse, with which Chinwe is the preeminent expert, and I've been working with them for a little while, as Chinwe knows. Do you just ask, and I'd be interested to hear David and Masood's view as well. But if I ask Chinwe first, do you think that the Lagos Multi-Door Courthouse has been a victim of its own success because it doesn't have a digital platform? It's working on paper. Has it just been too effective?
Well, I think they would want to move, forward from where they are. But my research uncovered is that the LMDC and most multi-door courthouses in Nigeria, they lack funding. So that's the aspect that is withholding any, further development, from where they are at the moment. So, yeah.
So did you find, David, did you find that the key to promoting effective mediation is to make it accessible to people through the online space? Is that really what the book concludes?
That's certainly part of that's got to be, I think, part of how we look at the future, but the other part of it is not necessarily just not just transplanting existing systems and placing them in the online space. I think that's also part of it. It's got to be a much more ground up type of reform program. Is my personal view. I think you've got inherent risks with just simply taking a system which has been successful in some ways and has had identified, already or pre-identified issues in others, and then simply expecting it to be able to operate in that online space. And I think something that I think I mentioned in my chapter in the book is about the small claims mediation service, which is it's great that service exists. I'm not necessarily convinced that it being in the same state as it was, or the same format that it was 15 years ago, is necessarily now operating in the best interests of court users who are, with the best will in the world, utilising things like online platforms much more. They communicate in different ways than they did 15, 20 years ago. And I think it's incumbent really on us to be providing a justice system which actually allows for that variety of communication methods. But I mean it absolutely does, Tony. I think anyway.
This point came up in the February, or it's in the minutes of the February meeting of the Online Procedure Rule Committee, where they're building a new portal for the Renters' Rights Act rights, and the committee members expressed concern that what was happening, and I'm not quoting, but the summary is what's happening, or what's being built, simply replicates paper processes and doesn't reflect, this is the point you were just making, David, doesn't reflect the modern scenarios. And apparently the MOJ are taking that one back, and I can't wait for the March minutes to be published. But it's an ongoing issue, and so this is, I think, really the brilliance of the timing of the book, which was obviously planned.
I was just gonna add on to what David was saying. I mean, I think absolutely right on all of those issues, and I think there's a key point here as well about. We've talked about culture change and getting people to think differently when it comes to ADR in particular and mediation, and that's something that Sir Andrew Ritchie mentions in his brilliant foreword to the book. And I think an element of that is trying to do your best, and this is to the policymakers really, a message to the policymakers, trying to do your best to ensure that the procedures and processes that are being designed, one, obviously they're designed around the litigant, that's essential. I mean, that's a procedural justice issue, but also making sure that from the outset of a dispute, this is going to pre-court, pre-action, as we say, making sure that disputants are aware of and are informed of and are educated about the different types of dispute resolution procedures that are out there. Because I think litigants in persons just see the court process and they think that's where I need to head in order to get my dispute resolved. But clearly, access to justice and the debate around access to justice is wider than that, isn't it? I mean, the access to justice means, yes, going to the court, but also going to an ADR procedure, which may actually resolve your dispute in a more satisfactory way for you. But that's a key element, I think, sometimes which is missed in the policy debates and discussions. And that's something that I've mentioned in my chapter. I think David, you touch on it, and it's trying to bring that culture change by actually effectively informing and educating litigants from the outset, i.e. pre-court, about ADR and mediation and the court process and what that actually means for access to justice. And that can only take place, I think, at the pre-action stage. And that's why I think it's so fundamental why the Civil Justice Council pre-action protocol review recommendations need to be implemented as a matter of urgency, because it also is consistent with the Master of the Rolls digitization agenda. I mean, I don't see why we can't take those recommendations with the digital justice system reform agenda that the MR is talking about, with the work of the OPRC, and say this is where we need to go. I think we can achieve everything. We can achieve, the MR's vision. We can achieve what the CJC have said in their report, and we can achieve what the OPRC are doing very nicely if everybody communicates and cooperates and engages. So let's hope that the CJC PAP review recommendations are implemented ASAP.
Yeah, as a crack record, Masood, we continue to batter away. But Chinwe, you did some research in the States, didn't you? Empirical research about awareness. I think that could be good to have. Yeah. What did you find? You went into different states.
Oh, whoa. It's so funny that we hear about ADR all the time, especially mediation, and you could think that everybody should be conversant with this mode of informal mode of settling disputes, but that's not so. Like, maybe could I just say maybe 2 or 3 people out of the people I interviewed in Minnesota. I have not put up that research for Minnesota, but I have the one for Washington and the one for Las Vegas, and I did in Ohio as well. But all of these cities, they do not know about ADR, mediation as well. And I kept telling them, if you have any dispute and you want it to be resolved quickly and for you to save money, just simplifying the method. You could check online. You could find the American Bar Association dispute resolution. You could see some of our members there. So I was just, but it was just it was alarming. And of course, I did research in Trinidad as well. That's the same issue facing Trinidad as well. People on the street do not know about ADR or even mediation. So, and in the UK as well, had this opportunity to interview people in Stratford. It's the same story. So
interesting. Peer mediation is the way forward. Is it? That's the ultimate solution, is it, David? Peer mediation.
What embedded within
primary schools and secondary?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the work to be done on public education is still absolutely huge, which is a bit alarming to say when we're this far down the road. It's not like this is new, but I mean, and Chinwe has just highlighted there. This isn't just specific to England, Wales as a jurisdiction. There are if you look across multiple jurisdictions, across multiple continents, where their civil justice systems have been based on an adversarial system, that overarching impression by people who go to court and who use the courts or have cause to use the courts, that's something that seems to just repeat itself almost with every generation. So I don't even think it's a jurisdiction specific thing. I think because internationally there isn't a huge amount of coordinated public legal education about mediation and its benefits.
Yeah.
That obviously then has a knock-on effect. So actually, yeah, I mean, the research that Chinwe is pointing to there, I think is really valid, because it kind of shines a light on a problem which actually everybody needs to confront at some point if there is a desire to ensure that mediation is adopted as a normalised part of a civil justice process.
Where do you see the future work lying with because it's such an important book in my view in terms of looking at modern mediation and is the next piece of work looking at the new model mediation system? Is that developing as it were, a blueprint for jurisdictions around the world to copy? Everybody seems to emulate the civil procedure rules. I mean, they're already doing that, I suppose.
Yeah. I think it's important to learn from other jurisdictions, which the book provides that platform for doing. But I think it's important to tailor those insights and best practices to the particular jurisdiction that you'll seek to implement the change in, rather than just transplanting it over. I think David mentioned this earlier on as well when he came to, I think, digitization and some of the other elements that we were talking about earlier on. So I think it's fundamental. I mean, mediation, as I say in my chapter, is on the rise. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But it's important that we learn from other jurisdictions, see where they're going with their reforms, but then obviously to focus on each particular jurisdiction and to craft, the type of mediation or where it's implemented or how it's implemented according to that particular jurisdiction. Otherwise, we could end up in situations like, as Fatima Arslan said in her excellent chapter on the Turkish experience, you can have a huge backlash, and people can go the opposite way. So yes, learn from other places. Digitization is a massive part of that. I think that's important for increasing access to justice. But it's also about culture change, as we discussed before, and it's also about educating litigants from the outset. And personally, again, from my perspective, that's where the pre-court, the pre-action stage is so fundamental. Because not only can it increase settlements which are satisfactory for the litigants, but also if it doesn't settle, as we know, if we can gather that data from the pre-action stage, we can then use that in the court process and further the principle of proportionality, better case management and judicial management of limited court resources.
And I think as well, just adding to what Masood said there, you've also got the issue of standards that mediators themselves, may adhere to. You've got certain codes which regulate mediation, which are absolute in their commitment to things like neutrality, and then you've got codes in other different jurisdictions where the emphasis on that is not quite as significant, or alternatively codes that where actually there is no standardized training regime for mediators. So I think it's so difficult when you've got so many jurisdictions who are, as Masood's just highlighted there, in completely different positions, and some of them just starting to realise, or it's dawning on them that actually mediation can have some benefits. Others, like ours, where mediation has actually been has been something which has been encouraged since the 90s, and yet we're still seeing the challenges that we've outlined, partially in this podcast and also in the book. So actually, mediators' approach to mediation as well means that actually, I think this one-size-fits-all type of approach it doesn't really work. But as Masood says, what we can do is look towards jurisdictions where perhaps it's been successful and also unsuccessful, take lessons from those. And I think if we could do more of that, that would certainly benefit how our approach is dictated for the future.
Yeah. And I remember looking this morning in more detail at the Cypriot proposal, the Cypriot draft legislation, where I mentioned earlier what they're planning to do.